The Philadelphia Eagles and New England Patriots played in Super Bowl 52 this past Sunday, with the Eagles defeating the Patriots by a score of 41-33. And in this video, I wanted to look at the game, how it unfolded, and specifically look at the progression of the Eagles this season as well as the past few seasons, and what events and what people are deserve credit for guiding the Eagles to the Super Bowl victory. It was, of course, the first Super Bowl victory in the Eagles franchise history. They had won an NFL. The previous They previously won NFL championships, with the latest one coming in 1960, but they had not won a Super Bowl since the merger of the two leagues, and they had appeared in two previous Super Bowls. In the 1980 regular season, losing to the Raiders, and then in the 2004 regular season, losing to the Patriots in Super Bowl 39. And then on the other side, of course, the Patriots were going for their sixth Super Bowl victory in the Belichick-Brady era. So, in terms of, I do want to look at the Eagles and the progression, like I mentioned, the progression of the team from where they have been and to where they went this year, which was to a 13-3 regular season, two playoff victories over the Falcons and the Vikings, and then ultimately the Super Bowl victory over the Patriots. In terms of people that deserve credit, I'll start with Howie Roseman, the general manager. So if you look at this team, there were so many key additions that were spearheaded by Roseman and the entire personnel department. And many of them were ones that went under the radar. They weren't necessarily splash signings or blockbuster trades. They were additions that, when they happened, people discussed them and just thought they were important, but maybe they like I said, they weren't blockbuster where it's huge breaking news. So I just want to look at some of them. Let's start off with a trade right before the regular season to bring in Ronald Darby, who, even though he got hurt at the beginning of the regular season, then played a big role at cornerback towards the end of the regular season and then also in the playoffs. And then, of course, you have Jay Ajayi, the running back who was key to the Eagles in their both once they acquired him in the regular season and then in the playoffs. Really important running back, and that was one where, again, it wasn't, they didn't give up that much to get him, and it was not necessarily huge news when they did acquire him. And then how about in the offseason signing Chris Long and LeGarrette Blount from the Patriots, who both played key roles throughout the year. And again, neither one of them were huge signings when they happened. And then, even some of the bigger ones like Alshon Jeffrey and Timmy Jernigan, great examples of smart decisions bringing players in. And then I think, of course, and then Roseman also deserves a lot of credit in drafting Carson Wentz, because if you remember that year, the Eagles originally had the 13th pick in the draft, and they traded up to 8, and then they traded up again to number 2 where they drafted Wentz. And although Wentz, of course, didn't play in the Super Bowl or in the playoffs, he was so important in the regular season, helping the Eagles get a great record, helping them in their quest to get home field advantage in the NFC playoffs, which I think was very, very important, because I'm not sure that if the Eagles didn't have home field advantage, they wouldn't have made the Super Bowl. I think that is maybe they would have, but it would have been a much more difficult road if you would have had to go to a Minnesota or to New Orleans or a place like that. And then moving on, the coach Doug Peterson, who was in his second year, such an he did such an unbelievable job with this team. If you look both, of course, with offensive game planning, but you also have to, if you mentioned Doug Peterson, you have to discuss his risk taking and the unbelievable job he did at in-game decisions of um, I don't know if risk taking is even the right word as much as uh, doing unorthodox decisions that led to big results. And probably the most famous one is the towards the end of the first half against the Patriots where they went for it on fourth down, fourth and goal, and they did the sort of reverse pass that ended up going to Nick Foles. You know, that's a huge call there. And if you think specifically about that play, the Eagles at that time were up by 3 points. If the Eagles decide to kick a field goal there, no one criticizes Peterson, and everyone just thinks that's a totally orthodox move. Like, no one's gonna criticize that, like I said, or mention it in terms of, oh, the Eagles should have gone for that. That would have just been a totally standard move. But if you think about it, if the Eagles would have kicked the field goal there, they would have gone up by 6, assuming they would have made it. And think about how that changes the game, because then the Patriots go into the locker room only down 6, and knowing that they're going to get the ball to start the second half, they're thinking they're in a great spot because they go right down the field and score a touchdown, and then they take the lead early in the third quarter, and that totally changes the entire game, and it totally changes the momentum and just the flow of the game, as opposed to them being down by 10, and when they score a touchdown, they're still down by 3, and the Eagles still have the momentum. And so that's just a perfect example of something that maybe was a little unorthodox to go for that and the play call, but it worked out and in some ways was the most important play of the game. And one thing I would mention that is it's so interesting, you know, if you follow football all levels, like Trey Burton threw that touchdown pass. And if, you know, after Tim Tebow left Florida, Florida struggled for a few years offensively. To a certain extent, they've struggled on offense every year since Tebow's been gone. But in the year there, once Tebow left, Florida had Trey Burton and Jordan Reed, who plays for the Redskins, and they kind of split time at quarterback. So it was kind of cool to see in such an important spot Trey Burton throw a pass when he did that a little bit at Florida. That's a total side note, but just interesting to look at. Going back to Doug Peterson, just that's just the key, is to take risks, like a riverboat gambler mentality. And one other play specifically from the Super Bowl that I would mention was on the very late in the game when the Eagles drove once they were down by 1 point in the fourth quarter, where they drove to take the lead back. They have another 4th and 1 from inside their own territory. And if the Eagles punt there, again, maybe that one he might have been under a little more criticism, but to a certain extent, punting there is the orthodox move, and he would not have been subject to that much criticism if they punted it there. And going for it was the right decision for many reasons. And of course it worked. They threw it to Zach Ertz for first down. But that's just another example of Peterson great, not just play calling, but decisions within the game as the head coach and your responsibility as the head coach. So now moving on to players that deserve credit, I think you have to start with the quarterbacks Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. Wentz, even though he got hurt, as I mentioned, he had an MVP caliber season, and without him, they almost certainly don't have that great record. They don't get home field advantage in the playoffs. And again, I'm not sure that they would have advanced to the Super Bowl if they didn't have home field. And so, yeah, Wentz didn't play in the Super Bowl, but I mean, he's very, very responsible for the Super Bowl victory. And then, of course, Nick Foles and the 3 playoff wins. He played so well. especially in the Vikings and the Patriots games. And you really can't say enough about him to deserve credit. Shifting over to the defensive side, I think there's so many guys you can mention, but Malcolm Jenkins, who is another one who they brought in via free agency. That was a few years ago, though. He played so well throughout the whole year and emerged, I think it's fair to say, as a team leader. And I think the Eagles had such a strong mentality on defense this year, and I think in a lot of ways that starts with him. And then, of course, Fletcher Cox, who was an Eagles draft pick at defensive tackle. And he was for sure one of the most dominant defensive players in the NFL this year and really the past couple of years. So basically, that's just the part I wanted to mention about the Eagles and their progression to this Super Bowl victory. In terms of the game itself and the playoff victories, I thought that if you go back and look at all three of the games, the playoff games, the divisional round over the Falcons, the conference championship against the Vikings, and then Super Bowl against Patriots, I thought there were three different games, but there were key plays in each game that I definitely think contributed significantly to the Eagles winning. If you look at the Falcons game, right before halftime, the Eagles were losing, but I had the ball. And Foles kind of threw a little bit of a, I don't know, risky pass, I guess you could say. And it literally bounced off of a Falcons player, and Torrey Smith caught it. And the Eagles wound up getting a field goal to go into halftime only down 1 point. And that changed the complexion of that game for sure. If you look at the Vikings game, in retrospect, it's easy to say, okay, the Eagles kind of blew out the Vikings a little bit, and so maybe there wasn't one key play, but remember, the Vikings very early on drove down the field, scored a touchdown, and had stopped the Eagles. But then Case Keenum threw an interception in return for a touchdown, and that totally changed the momentum of the whole game. It not only tied the score, but it just flipped the game right on its head. And that's just an example of a play where not luck, but to win a championship in a league like the NFL that's so competitive and so evenly balanced between all the teams, you sometimes need plays like that where things just kind of bounce your way, or you just get an intervention that goes in your favor. And then in Super Bowl, I mentioned a couple of the plays already, but definitely that fourth and goal pass to Foles was a total game-changing play. And then I think also the Patriots had a couple of offensive drives in the first half where they were driving but stalled a little bit. One, they missed a field goal, and then the other, they turned it over on downs. And you give credit to the Eagles' defense for sure in that, but especially the field goal miss, that was a little fortunate from the Eagles' perspective. So that's kind of the recap. I think it's going to be interesting, looking forward for both the Eagles and the Patriots. They're definitely two interesting teams moving forward. But just looking at the Patriots' perspective, like how much more of the Belichick-Brady era do they have? Can they improve the rest of their roster a little bit? What happens with guys like Gronkowski? Will Edelman come back? So we'll see. That's the Patriots are always an interesting team. And then from the Eagles' perspective, like, can they build on this? Again, they're probably going to have a very similar roster next year in terms of personnel, because they have a lot of the guys in their contract. And so maybe they'll have a little roster turnover like every NFL team does, but probably in the key places they'll be set. And then, of course, they'll probably get Wentz back. If not for the first game of the regular season, certainly you'd assume very early on next year, unless there's some weird setback. And then finally, I would just mention, what do they do with Foles? Do they bring him back as a backup? Do they entertain trade offers for him? And I'm just kind of interested. I'd be interested in wondering like what Foles' perspective on that is. Like, does he want to come back and be the backup after being the Super Bowl MVP, or would he prefer to go to another team and have his own starting position? That's definitely something that's interesting, and we'll see how that works out. Because I think that they probably could get a nice return for him in terms of a trade. But from the Eagles' perspective, is that worth having that insurance policy of having Foles as the backup in case Wentz does get injured again? We'll see. That's an interesting dynamic. That's probably one of the bigger storylines for the Eagles this offseason. So anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it and enjoyed the NFL season and the Super Bowl.